When you envision the future of humanity, how many people do you imagine living and working on the moon? 100? 1,000? 10,000? 10 million? I guess that depends on which stage of lunar development you're envisioning. Early stage small lunar outposts or fully fledged lunar cities? How many years pass between those stages? Decades? Centuries? Millennia? What if I told you that the progression from small lunar outposts to fully fledged cities might happen much quicker than anyone realizes? That the demand for massive expansion is there, but that the largest constraint to lunar economic development will be launch frequency over anything else. Let me explain. Lunar regolith is full of iron, especially the regolith located in the relatively flat mare regions, where we'd want to establish a lunar economy for many of the same reasons we like to build cities on flat areas here on Earth. Not to mention, it makes landing a whole lot easier. And it turns out that we can turn this regolith into steel and oxygen gas by smelting it with chromium anode electrolysis reactors and adding a dash of carbon and other alloys. With steel you can make panels and beams, and panels and beams and 5-axis CNC machines make lunar dreams. With panels and beams you can build big breathable boxes, also known as buildings, and you can fund the construction of these big breathable boxes using other people's money. Government grants if you're well connected, but if not, you can get private venture funding because you'll make a return on their investment, a profit by selling tickets to stay in those big steel boxes you'll construct because they are located somewhere people will pay to stay. The moon. At least that's what you'll tell your investors, but you know deep down that in reality, the real ROI won't come from just tourism, but rather from the much deeper pockets of Uncle Sam and friends, since you understand that as soon as the first prototype base is completed and shown to be reliable, a flood of bids will come in for non-tourism related facilities. The demand for lunar real estate will become massive. See, you're kind of smart sometimes, and you know that, like the iPhone before, nobody knows they need a lunar facility because nobody has a lunar facility. But as soon as lunar construction becomes a reality, the focus on tourism will fall quickly, as neither NASA, nor ESA, nor DARPA, nor the DOE, nor the DoD, nor the NRO, or the NGIA, or the NIAID, or the Space Force, or Oracle, or Microsoft, or Google, or Pfizer, or Amazon are going to be outbid by a bunch of tourists. And so a global bidding race will begin for everything from massive telescopes for NASA, to a research lab for Johns Hopkins, to a seed bank for Nordgen, to an AI training data center for Oracle, as a massive line forms between the wealthiest wannabe tourists and the institutions and corporations with much deeper pockets outbidding each other and everyone else for the limited resources and time it takes to build a building on the moon. But you know none of it will matter because as soon as Russia and China land the first joint survey rover, the President of the United States will enact the power of the purchaser to procure a federal joint strategic lunar facility. Strictly for peaceful scientific research, of course. You can do a lot with steel panels and beams and 5-axis CNC machines, yet no matter how advanced your domestic lunar production capacity becomes, no matter how much you make off-world, this roaring economic engine will always need inputs from Earth or elsewhere for anything that cannot be easily sourced on the moon. Nitrogen, nitrogen derivatives, humans, and hydrogen, including all the H2O and hydrocarbons humans like to ingest, such as food and microplastics. You know, basically anything that isn't iron or silica or oxygen or a creep composite. This shouldn't be that surprising. Every modern economy on Earth, even the most insulated, still need imports. But how much our lunar economy can import will depend on two things: how often we can land a load on the lunar surface, and how large that load is. A Starship-sized super heavy lift launch vehicle has a generously high-end estimated payload capacity of 200 tons to the lunar surface. If we land one Starship-sized rocket on the moon every single day, 365 days a year, then we could deliver 73,000 tons of stuff a year. That may sound like a lot, but it's not. It's not enough for even a small lunar economy, much less a growing and thriving one. To put it into perspective, that's less than a single medium-sized Panamax bulk carrier from 1980 can carry, which is about 75,000 metric tons a year. Wait, no, not in a year, in a single trip, at any given time. But okay, I realize comparing cargo ships to rockets is like comparing apples to atom bombs. However, we're not concerned about energy, but rather logistics here, and 73,000 tons a year is very little. So let me try another comparison that's probably a bit more familiar. A small Walmart receives about 5 trucks a day to remain stocked, which would be about 1,825 trucks a year. And this was actually surprisingly hard to find data on, so tell me in the comments if I'm wrong, but according to several truck drivers, it seems that the typical semi-truck load weight is around 22 metric tons in the US, although it can be much higher. But let's just say 22 tons per truck as a conservative estimate, meaning a single Walmart receives about 40,150 tons of goods a year. And yeah, I'm basing this on info garnered from Quora and Reddit posts from truck drivers and Walmart stalkers, but at the end of the day, 7,000 grains of barley weighs 45% as much as a chunk of platinum iridium alloy from 1889. So I am officially proposing the addition of a new unit of measurement to the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, the Walmart, which is equal to 40,150 metric tons, or about 619 billion grains of barley. If we land one Starship-sized rocket on the moon every single day, 365 days a year, then we could deliver 1.8 Walmarts of stuff a year. But how realistic is that launch frequency? I mean, can we actually land one Starship-sized rocket on the moon every single day of the year? Well, no. 2023 saw 223 orbital launches, setting a world record for the 3rd year in a row. That averages out to roughly a single launch every 1.5 days across all of Earth. Think of all the things that go into a single launch from Earth. The logistics, communication, and supply lines, the timing and tracking and coordinating, all of this done once every 24 hours on Earth by an essential workforce with rare skills and experience who will need vacation and sick days. And now realize that launching a rocket from Earth is not the same as landing a rocket on the lunar surface, and this landing aspect is likely the tighter end of this bottleneck, as you have to take all those things involved in the Earth launch and do them again for landing on the lunar surface, plus the extra step of unloading the payload, refueling, and then launching again from the moon back into orbit, all in under 24 hours. This means a round-the-clock workforce with constant supply inputs, not to mention that any time delays and scrubbed launches will cause a traffic jam in the logistic network both on Earth and on the moon. And there's solar storms and meteoroid streams, which is sort of like a space weather problem of its own. So landing a fat load of any size on the lunar surface once every 24 hours is likely impossible in both the near and mid-term. But let's say we can, optimistically, get to the point where we're able to launch a super heavy rocket from Earth every single day of the year. These would not be direct trips from the ground to the lunar surface because, in reality, Starship-like vehicles need to undergo orbital refueling once reaching low Earth orbit to give them enough juice to make it the rest of the way to the moon. It's currently estimated that for each trip to the moon, anywhere between 5 and 12 fuel launches will have to be performed. At a 10-to-1 ratio, for every ship sent to the moon, 10 fuel launches would need to be performed, 11 launches total. At a launch rate of 1 a day, out of 365 launches a year, only 33 would be moon-bound, yielding just 6,600 tons, or 16.4% of a Walmart. With 8 fuel launches per trip, we'd net 20.2% of a Walmart, and with just 5 launches, we'd net 30.3%. But let's be super optimistic and unrealistic and say the ratio of payload to fuel launches is just 2 to 1. So for each moon-bound ship, only 2 other fuel ships will need to be launched. 3 launches total. At this unrealistically optimistic ratio, if we launch the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, every single day of the year, only 60.6% of a small Walmart would make it to the moon. And then we still have to get people there. So far, we've just assumed people are on the moon, but they have to get there using the same vehicles as the goods they're consuming, sharing from the same pool of 365 launches a year. Using our unrealistic ratio of 2 to 1, out of 365 launches in a year, 244 would be devoted to refueling missions. That leaves us with 121 launches for goods and the humans they're intended to supply. So if we can only get 60% of a Walmart to the moon, we need to know how many people that can support. And we're not talking about survival necessities, food and water. We're talking about a lunar economy with a large tourism base, so amenities. Sure, in the case of tourism, they're there for the experience itself, and people often live in smaller quarters on cruise ships than they would otherwise, but cruise ships still have alcohol and games and stuff. So how many people can a Walmart worth of amenities support? Well, people per Walmart is kind of a bad question because man cannot live off Walmart alone. There are lots of other suppliers in the market, so how could you ever find a reliable metric to base this on? I mean, it's not like there are any places that just have a single Walmart providing for the entire community like some corporate dystopia deserted island Walmart scenario. Oh wait, that's just the Midwest. All across the Midwest and Appalachia, there are small towns with populations between 2,000 to 6,000 people whose entire economy and existence is supplied by a single Walmart. Like mining company towns of old, they are Walmart company towns, which kinda confused me. How are these sustainable if they don't produce anything? They just consume Walmart goods in exchange for working at Walmart? Sure, coal company towns monopolized the entire market, but they existed to export coal. They produced something. I mean, I grew up in a small town in Texas, but it was near a large city, and most people commuted to the city for work. But these towns I'm talking about are in the absolute middle of nowhere, way too far to commute. So then how do these towns, which don't commute to a nearby big city, and don't really seem to produce anything, no factories or workshops or mines, not even farms in most cases, remain on consumption alone? Now I'm making broad strokes here, as every one of these forgotten places has a unique background and character. But in general, it seems that most of these places were established and grew to their peaks from 2 things: energy or transportation. Either coal or oil was discovered there at some point 100 years ago, the mines and wells now long since exhausted, or a railroad or cattle trail stop. And that's pretty much it. But that's the story for tons of abandoned ghost towns too. Why are these still here? How are these places sustainable? Well, the truth is, they aren't. All of them have seen population declines every census for decades. They are on their way to ghost towns. It seems most kids who grow up in these areas move out as quickly as possible. So they are dying, just slowly. Does having a Walmart slow their death spiral? Well, there is only a Walmart there because Walmart felt there was a large enough serviceable market to warrant the upfront investment. So there has to be something other than Walmart bringing money into these towns. And with more digging, I found that those who remain and aren't employed by a local Walmart are typically employed in either trucking or the oil industry, the nature of which sees them leaving home for several weeks at a time, and then returning for a few weeks of off time. So they do commute, but instead of heading to a nearby city, they traverse state lines and national borders. Interestingly, this pattern of employment links them to the very industries that originally led to the development of their towns: energy and transportation. These industries have deep historical roots in the community, shaping its identity and economic foundation over generations. Deep roots to the past. Roots which give these places staying power long past their expiration. Debt, welfare, addiction, they all do their part in keeping people in places like these, but the real staying power, that which has kept these towns on a map with enough population to warrant a Walmart, are their roots to the past. Like old oaks, communities with deep roots may stand for generations, nourished by the past. But while roots can be nourishing, they can also be entangling. While many may leave, emigrating to greener pastures, places of growth, these forsaken places endure because every year some of the youth remain, some who might otherwise have found opportunities and fulfillment elsewhere, trapped by their families, their memories, their social networks, their comfort, their homes. The weight of history both anchors and restrains. Every generation that remains sustains the community, preserving its traditions and stories, but these are other people's stories, not their own. Futures sacrificed for the sake of the past. Jupiter eating his children. But the truth is, eventually, the day will come when even the strongest oaks must bow. These towns are nothing more than the high water marks of a long-forgotten wave, the remnants of historical echoes in a void, silently living out their twilight years, quickly approaching oblivion, as one by one homes are left to rot and the concrete cracks grow. No matter how many once called them home, eventually these forsaken places will fade. Even the oldest trees with the deepest roots are toppled eventually, usually cut down to make way for a new Walmart. This is rarer. Oh wait, no it's not. This is anthrofuturism. What the hell? Where was I? Oh, yeah. How many people can a small Walmart worth of amenities serve per year? This is a random smattering of 36 Walmarts in towns across the Midwest and Appalachia that have less than 10,000 population and aren't located close to a major city. I literally just typed into Google Maps Walmart and then zoomed into the middle of nowhere, then clicked search this area, and did that 36 times, and every time I was surprised to find multiple Walmarts. There are a lot more, so this is neither rigorous nor exhaustive, but it gives us a general idea of how many people we can have per Walmart. The lowest population was 1,405, the highest was 8,750, and the average was 5,075. So let's just round down to 5,000. We also have to consider this a high-end estimate because Walmarts typically get their nitrogen-oxygen atmospheres for free from the planet they love to pave over, and thus they don't have to maintain an enclosed and pressurized environment with an extensive and material-heavy life support system that, even with very high efficiencies, will always need some level of input, all of which eats into our annual mass allowance. In other words, there's a lot more overhead, as some of the Walmart worth of mass will need to go into maintaining the figurative Walmart itself. But anyways, we'll just ignore that and say one Walmart equals 5,000 people. So of our 121 lunar landing launches, how many should be devoted to people and how many to cargo? For instance, if all 121 were devoted to cargo and the humans were left to hitchhike to the moon, then we'd achieve that 60% of a Walmart discussed earlier, which would be enough amenities for 3,000 people. But since humans cannot hitchhike to the moon, how many of those 121 launches would it take to deliver 3,000 people? How many people per launch? A Boeing 747 has an internal volume of 876 cubic meters and carries 416 passengers. A 200-ton capable Starship-sized rocket would have a 1,000 cubic meter fairing, 14% more than the 747, but would also have to carry more supplies per passenger on a much longer 3-day journey to the moon than the 747, so we'll call it even and say a single launch to the moon can carry 400 people. So at this point we need to figure out the optimal ratio use of our launch allowance, which is recursive. At 400 people per launch, it would take 7.5 launches to deliver 3,000 people to the moon, which would subtract from our 121 launches, leaving us with only 113 launches for supplies, which would reduce the number of people we can support from 3,000 to 2,814, which would require 7.03 launches, which would leave 114 for supplies, which is enough for 2,839 people, which would take only 7.09 launches. So we could host about 2,800 people continuously. That is the maximum growth bottleneck of lunar development, launching a fully reusable 200-ton capable super heavy lift launch vehicle every single day. that unrealistically only needs 2 orbital refueling launches. When we imagine humanity's future in space, do we imagine 2,800 people? Or 10,000? 10 million? So that's the problem. The lunar economy's growth will be bottlenecked not by capital investments or even launch costs, but by import logistics, launch frequency, more than anything else. Sure, you can establish new launch sites and expand old ones to try and meet demand and loosen FAA standards, but every scrubbed launch due to weather or technicalities will cost time and money. Building out lots of infrastructure, further increasing scale and supply chain logistics for everything from fuel to ground operations. We can also increase the size and payload capacity of the rocket itself, building an even larger rocket than those currently in development. Besides the additional upfront R&D costs, this will also require an increased build-out of launch infrastructure, larger facilities for larger rockets, more scale and supplies running through larger and longer supply chains, and a larger workforce. And actually, this sounds great. A massive, thriving space industry employing hundreds of thousands of people is a future I want. But each of those steps would only marginally increase the percentage of a Walmart delivered per year. And we already took a highly optimistic measure of 2 fuel launches per trip. Almost all improvements we could do on the ground in the next few decades would just get us to that level. So I know it seems crazy that saying 2,800 people on the moon isn't enough at a time when we haven't had a single person on the moon in over half a century, but unless we want humanity's lunar presence to end up like those Walmart towns in rural America, a flash in the pan, then we'll need to do something drastic to increase our supply lines, and with it our off-world economic staying power. Something that might look a little like this. Lunar freighters, the bulk carriers of the Earth lunar merchant fleet. But unfortunately, this discussion is going to have to wait until the next video, which should be out shortly. So stay tuned, and until then, I want to extend a huge thanks to Patreon supporters and channel members: Ted Thayer, Adam Radonis, Brandon Hicks, Rick, Jonathan Crone, Mustafa Mon, Joshua Paletti, and Stephen Reed.